Hello, Froggy here.
For generations, the Dreaming City housed one of the Awoken's most closely guarded secrets.
The wrong load. A while back, Bungie changed the Last Wish to block access to all public loads. And recently we figured out how to take advantage of this in a very strange way. I covered this briefly in a previous video on how we can use this to revive the Last Wish to Shattered Throne route. But just a brief recap of that. If you head back towards Bay and die sufficiently far, you can then go out of map here and head towards the load zone for Font of Starlight. And while that load does not happen normally, since we got close to Bay first, it's been set up to take us there for some reason. Just gotta go hit the load right around here. And we're in the Bay. We're not limited to using Font of Starlight here. The Rheasilvia load is also disabled. I've gone ahead and set up the Bay wrong load. Now I just have to remember how to hit the Rheasilvia load because there's been no reason to since it's been disabled for quite a while here. I do have fond memories of hitting this one because if you do this in regular patrol and stand on the default, the second person to die to that load will fall through the map. But anyways, we're back in Bay again. Now there are some limits here. I've set up the Bay wrong load again, and this time I'm going to go back a little bit towards Bay. And now let's see what happens. I didn't go too far from where I spawned. And yet, when I jump into the load zone here, nothing happens. The load has been disabled again. Let's try that again. This time I'm not going to go quite as far in this direction. Right about there, and let's see how it behaves now. Back over to the load, and we've got Bay. So what's going on here? As best as I can tell, once you get sufficiently close to the Bay load, the game sort of primes you to load that region. But once you leave that area, the game undoes whatever work it does. By respawning sufficiently far away, we leave the area that would turn off this priming. Keep in mind the regions I've drawn here are mostly nonsense and they could be any sort of shape. We'd have to do a lot more testing to know what it really looks like. I presume that the way that Bungie has disabled these load zones simply disables this priming, with the load trigger still staying in place. However, if nothing's been primed to load, the load zone acts as though it doesn't exist. At the time of the first video I made covering this strange disabled load phenomenon, we were only aware of the ability to load Tower of Opened Eyes, and I was completely perplexed about why the load could have been getting enabled. But once we had more examples, there was more of a pattern to try to make sense of. Here's a example of one way that you can reactivate the Tower of Opened Eyes load. For some reason, there is a gong. That is probably unrelated, but who knows. Anyways, the load should be right around here. And Tower of Opened Eyes. Although that does bring up an opportunity for a bit of a meme video here. If I set my spawn within the load zone for Font of Starlight, I can then go ahead and prime the Bay of Drowned Wishes load, and as long as I don't actually set any spawn points on the way over there, once I die to the turnback, I should spawn right into the load zone and immediately load into Bay, which I'm sure will make for a very confusing clip. Well, it may look like I simply get close to Bay, die, and spawn inside of it. What's actually going on is a little bit more complicated. How about Spine of Keres? Getting there is a little bit more difficult, but luckily I happen to know that the fallback point for Devolution Mists happens to be right next to the load zone for Spine of Keres. So if we just go there and die, that should prime the load for Spine. Now we just have to go and hit any of the disabled load zones. And sure enough, we spawn directly into Spine of Keres. Last Wish isn't the only raid that disables loads. Vow of the Disciple does too. The only load you can hit from Miasma is Bog of the Disciple. You can't even normally approach the other load zones because of various barriers in the way. However, during my testing of Vow earlier, I did find that the fallback point happens to be right around the Lost Sector load. So if you have an ally block off that default, we're using the Bog to Miasma default here, since that one was a bit more convenient. You can spawn right on the other side of the shield. And let's see what happens if we try to go to the Lost Sector. As soon as we hit the load, Disciples Bog. Very interesting. Back in regular patrol, we have a similar thing where Bog of the Disciple is not enabled. It used to be enabled and Bog 2 was disabled, but it was very buggy then, and at some point they disabled Bog 1 as well. But anyways, let's get out of the map and see what we can do. Now, I never really noticed that hole to the right there. I wonder if we can do anything in here. Yeah, it seems to be pretty blocked off, so I'll just go. Oh! I guess you can go here. This is actually probably a lot more convenient than trying to jump back across into the twice patched hole on the other side. It is a bit annoying these days, but this isn't a bad climb at all. I'll probably switch to using that hole when I want to get out in this area now. So you may remember this route from back in the day trying to break into the raid early. A lot of people went this sort of way to explore Bog 1, which of course didn't end up being very much of the raid at all. We can hit the load safely by jumping right around here. It can be rather long. I caught out 45 seconds of load time there. And now we just want to sword fly over to Bog. It's been a while since I've done this. There are many death barriers, so I guess be a bit careful. You're going to want to fly pretty sharp right here to avoid these death barriers. It's a bit annoying with the green fog, but those two pillars sticking down are a great landmark to see which way you should go. And eventually you'll get to a bit of land you can stand on. Sparrow flying can help finish the gap there, or I suppose strand or just sword flying good. At about the end of this land, you can jump out and hit the bog load. At least, if it were possible to hit it from patrol. Now that we've gotten out here, we can go and approach whatever zone we would like to test for wrong loading. You just want to be careful not to hit the zone itself. But as long as we don't set a spawn point, we should respawn sufficiently far away and conveniently close to the bog load that we're going to be hitting to wrong load. Just got to avoid hitting the load to the left of there. And I don't know. Somewhere around here should work. I haven't done this too many times, and I don't know the shape of the regions involved, but if I can get my shots to bounce correctly here, we should be able to see if we can get into which exactly. Now this particular one right here isn't very useful, but it could potentially be useful elsewhere. For instance, what if the load zone for bog happened to be near some out-of-box land in Witch's Echo? It could be a box break. Of course it isn't, but the possibility remains. It's natural to wonder, is this possible for all potential load destinations and all possible disabled loads? The answer? We just don't know. For this test, I have a spawn point back at the bog load, and I res breached up about where the clip started. I'm heading back to the Quagmire load, and Adelaide and Denevik are standing by to block the two spawn points I set for the res breach with stasis crystal, so that when I respawn, I will skip back to bog. Hopefully this will put me close enough to the load and then far enough away from the load to get the wrong load to happen. I'm not exactly sure how many spawn points I set, so Denevik is just blocking the whole area. And I'm back by bog. Oh. Gotta keep going underneath here. And nothing. Don't know if I wasn't close enough, or if I did something that disabled it, or if the mere act of having the game check a previous spawn point that it's not putting you at is too much. Probably not that one, though. We also weren't able to get that to work for Fluorescent Canal, and haven't tried the lost sector in that area yet. I also had no luck doing it in Last Wish, trying to go from the Rheasilvia load or the Strand load over to the Confluence. But once again, I don't know whether that was me failing to meet some condition of the glitch, or if it's simply not possible for those. And if not, I'm not sure why. It could be that for the case of Miasma, trying to use a public load as the target doesn't work. But in the case of Last Wish, Confluence is not a public zone, so I don't really see why that one would be any different. To give you an idea of how powerful this glitch could be, if we were able to do this using a non-disabled zone, then you could, say, get to the galaxy pools for die and long load using, say, the load back into sludge and spawn in unnamed Forest 1 and be a short sword fly away from galaxy pools with no box break required. It also gives us a tool to identify load zones that are disabled, which before would be entirely unthinkable. But imagine you set up this glitch and, say, you walk towards an innocent-looking cave entrance, and then all of a sudden you're loading into wherever you had set up the glitch for. Now you know that there is a hidden load there, and who knows what that could eventually lead to. We're still in the somewhat early phases of testing with this one, so the more eyes we have on it, the better. Who knows what this will be able to do in the future. But yeah, go ahead and try this out. Are there any other disabled loads I've missed? Perhaps Battlegrounds. We actually have a means of testing that now, so that's pretty exciting. Let me know what you managed to find. And I'll probably be messing around with it a bit more myself.